It has now been more than a month since the release of Marvel Spider-Man 2 at the time of writing this. The hype has now settled down, all of us have discussed the game's story, trashed how hideous Miles' final suit is, which also happens to be an Adidas ad for some reason, the many memes that followed, the fact that it didn't win any awards in this year's TGAs just like the first game because the competition was really fierce this year with strong contenders such as Baldur's Gate 3 and Alan Wake 2, wink wink nudge nudge, and so much more. In my case, I was ready to discuss the game as soon as I finished the main story and obtained the Platinum Trophy, but in the back of my mind there was this lingering feeling, one that required me to sit with my thoughts for quite some time and really take apart what I like about it and what I don't, and properly convey most of my mixed feelings I was having while playing the game, and yes, we are going there. And also, as you've seen by the title, I am confident in saying that Marvel Spider-Man 2 is more of the same, in its mechanics, content and story, and that approach brought a myriad of positives and negatives I'm keen on discussing today. And don't get me wrong, while the overall experience didn't hit the same way the first game and Miles Morales did, I can't deny that I had a lot of fun getting to experience the many new additions, refinements, and improvements brought to the table, thanks to Insomniac's commitment to quality over quantity, even if at points that method can occasionally lead to disparities between the various elements working in tandem. By the way, this review will be spoiler heavy through and through, so you've been warned. If there's one thing about the presentation that I really admire compared to the previous games is one, the visual density, as there are more environmental props like vegetation, traffic, people and more that make the city really feel alive. And second, the addition of an SSD for this new game being a next-gen exclusive does wonders to just how quickly everything loads now, and also how the game design is influenced by its inclusion. And in some cases it does have an impact on the formula that was established with the PS4 entries. Alongside these new benefits by the PS5 hardware, Insomniac also finds ways to embellish the presentation in ways that seek to blend important information within the world, like the Breath of the Wild approach of having collectibles and landmarks be marked in the game world with visual signifiers like Sandman, a crystal cloud of sand, or the mechanical birds flying around buildings containing a computer to reveal the hidden bases of Craven's hunters. It's cool to see more AAA games adopt design choices that actively seek to immerse you in the world, and admittedly, even though it can look jarring with how some elements don't naturally fit with the realistic city in the first few hours, I'd much rather have that than opening a menu or the map every single time just to follow a marker. Quick side note, but I really love how the inclusion of Venom naturally includes the addition of cosmic horror elements. Earlier this year I played through the Dead Space remake and I found myself amazed by the art direction and how disgusting it looked, having this uncommon combination of gratuitous human flesh and sci-fi tech, and how that added a lot to the atmosphere. In Spider-Man 2 this happens in the third act when the city gets covered in vine-like structures, or when Venom opens his wings during his boss fight, which is by the way the rawest design you could ever give to him. And couple that with the designs for the enemy symbiotes themselves, it adds to the creepy vibe, even if it doesn't lean much into horror as much as I'd like, and it makes sense why that can happen. Spider-Man 2 is a very interesting sequel where instead of rebuilding new assets from scratch and leaning into something new and fresh, the game takes the iterative sequel approach, where the idea is reusing assets and buildings upon them to still deliver a fresh experience, and I really respect that because if you know me, the one thing I cherish in my game dev life is reusing assets, and I strongly recommend more devs to do so because you already have game ready assets to be deployed at any moment, and you get to push out games with a shorter dev cycle. The Yakuza, or Like a Dragon series as it's called now, is a perfect example of this, as RGG takes advantage of reusing assets by focusing on the story and combat mechanics to keep the experience fresh. And sometimes by reusing assets they also explore new ideas of how to expand an already existing town, or make a new one altogether, as it is evident in Yakuza 3, 4 and 5. In the case of Spider-Man 2, it takes what worked in both Spider-Man and Miles Morales, and not only does it expand on those core ideas, but it also implements new ones that objectively enhance the gameplay in ways that it wasn't possible before, and some of those thanks to the power of the PS5, the most significant being Traversal and combat. Swinging remains as it was, where most of its design goal is to make you feel like Spider-Man, and in place there is a ton of assistance provided to make it feel fluid and simple. This time around, however, Insomniac heard the criticisms of swinging feeling too simple, and within the accessibility options, they provide you with options to manually tweak how much assistance you want in your swinging, meaning the more you lower the assistance, the more physics-based it becomes, and that forces you to really consider how you go about your daily drive, as you now have to focus on both the speed and the distance you shoot off from. And you really feel it in the moment you start swinging, as the Spider-Man feel like controlling a pendulum, always trying not to fumble a swing, almost as if we're going through what our heroes go through and getting inside their heads trying to process everything. And it's a very genius way of handling things, as it provides options for people, and it's always a win for everybody. Web wings make their debut, and as an aficionado for wingsuits in video games, they are perfect here. And what makes them so cool is that it's not really flying as if you're controlling Superman or Batman. It's more akin to the Just Cause games, where physics also plays into how you glide into the air, and how that tends to influence your moment-to-moment movement and how practical or stylish you want to be. And when you add the wind tunnels, moreover, which contribute to the maximum speed you can attain or maintain as you roam around the city, makes it a nice addition on top of everything else that makes this flow brilliantly. If you watch my video analyzing the combat for both Spider-Man and Miles Morales, which you should watch for some context of how I'm approaching this segment, my overall thoughts are that the objective has always been to not make you feel like Spider-Man, but let you feel like Spider-Man, in the sense of you being given tools and create your own fun out of those tools, by how you conduct them and yourself throughout encounters. Almost like a Devil May Cry game where you make your own combos instead of the game providing you with pre-made ones. It's all about options at the end of the day. Instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, Spider-Man 2 retains much of that same philosophy, and the only change it largely sees is the adoption of more real-time agency than ever present. For example, the gadget wheel is gone, and during combat you can quickly cycle between 4 different gadgets and 4 different abilities equipped on the face buttons and D-pad respectively when you press the bumpers as you see fit. I absolutely love this idea, and in many scenarios pressing the right gadget at the right moment felt exhilarating, as in my case it allowed me to prepare finishers or extend combos, like the upshot gadget that keeps enemies juggling in the air, similar to the gravitational device you had in the first game. As I say this, I also find it disappointing that the game cuts most of the gadgets present in the past 2 games for only 4 and nothing else, which is a weird design choice because with the abilities you can swap them between the regular and Venom powers for both Spider-Man, but with the gadgets you can't, and it was a really missed opportunity not to bring them back, as they were already functional and perfect. For the main combat moves themselves, there are new attacks that really represent just how far in experience both our heroes are currently, and some of them even became my favorites, like hitting the enemies so hard on concrete they bounce back, sliding under them mid-air, further launching them in the air after a web kick. And the best of all, kicking enemies in the groin really hard, followed by a kick in the chin for max damage. It's so nasty and it never gets tiresome. Like mentioned, abilities are also present, more involved than they were in the first Spider-Man game, where now they mainly serve as super attacks, and they spruce them up with some cool animations on top of dealing a heavy dose of damage. And at the end of the day, the beauty of these new additions is seeing every one of them harmoniously communicate with each other to give you some of the most visceral experience Insomniac has cooked so far. Parrying is also a thing now, where whenever enemies have yellow flashes ringing across their whole body, you can, as the name suggests, parry and even counterattack, and its inclusion is genius. One of the minor issues that I had with the combat of the 2 previous games is how quickly you can get overwhelmed on higher difficulties if you're not dodging enough, especially once enemies get a note of you and spam attacks that are difficult to dodge. So having a parry system in place completely eliminates that issue, and it further keeps you on your toes as you're forced to be more proactive should the occasion call for it. I learned this the hard way with the Lizard boss fight, as well as with Lee fighting Miles, where I was getting absolutely cooked for like 20 minutes and eventually I had to force myself to stop and think instead of mashing buttons mindlessly like I do when I get to these bosses. You could make the argument that the combat still feels and plays the same as before, and you're right. Even with the new additions, the combat framework remains purposefully designed with that one goal of letting you feel like Spider-Man. But personally, I don't care. I already love the combat. I've pretty much mastered it, as I'm always playing these games on the hardest difficulties just so I can take in as much of the combat experience as possible. And just in general, these new additions make the combat system even better, that it's low-key hard to go back to the previous games. Speaking of improving combat systems, the new MJ segments are no joke incredible, like clearly one of the best day and night improvements brought forth, and it's mostly in part to how much agency we are given. In the first game, her segments were more like a cat and mouse game, and how far you could get away by awkwardly cheesing through her segments, like Norman's flat in the first game for example. And much of the frustration in her segments was how the little agency you were given negatively affected progression by slowing gameplay to a crawl. So this time around, our agency is increased by literally turning her segments into a third-person shooter and having complementing mechanics that actively contribute to the overall gameplay loop. She can even take an arrow to her shoulder and not die, and I genuinely don't care whether she is OP or not. If this is what it took to make her segments more engaging, then I'm all for it. It's like playing a Peggy 16 version of The Last of Us, which is funny to think about. Before I go on about the story, I need to flex a bit my Spider-Man credentials, so you understand where I'm coming from. First and foremost, I am not a comics person, period. My relationship with Spider-Man mainly comes from other media, as I first saw him in the Raimi films and immediately fell in love with his character, and how cool he was. As I grew older, even not reading the comics that much, my fascination grew even more, for the ideals he stands for, his relationships, and how he struggles to balance his normal life and being a superhero.
What's important is not standing by and allowing someone to suffer or die because you do nothing. If you don't get that, then you don't get the first thing about being Spider-Man.
And just how resilient he is through and through. And every piece of media he's present in reflect that, whether it be the web films with Andrew Garfield, the flawed trilogy from Watts with Tom Holland, and I feel that's mostly production woes and how often Marvel and Sony clash with each other. The games, the TV shows, Spider-Man simply is that guy, and his appeal has remained strong and steadfast for more than 60 years. I also need to add that Marvel's Spider-Man has one of my favorite Spidey stories ever, and Insomniac's take on him hit in a way I feel many people didn't expect. A very compelling human drama that covers what Spider-Man fundamentally is and what he represents. His relationship with Otto and how that evolves throughout the story, how Mr. Negative seemed to be at first the main big baddie until that evolves into the Sinister Six, and the way Peter interweaves into dealing with them while also having to deal with a private army with a sociopathic leader. Miles' presence and how he actively contributes to the story, take a note of this by the way, and ultimately the major losses he experiences in a matter of hours. The loss of a mentor he deeply admired and the ultimate sacrifice of saving the entire city or his aunt. It's genuinely one of those stories that does so much in just how many elements it has packed into it, and in the end it comes out triumphantly, balancing every element by giving it the appropriate screen time and having everything connect to the core themes of the story. Even the side content is strong. I simply love this story, the emotion it pushes, and I'll forever cherish it as one of the best bodies of work in the character's history. From the jump, it would be very difficult to top that story, and I was never expecting it to. I am not a picky person, nor do I expect things to go the way I want. I just want devs to have the creative freedom they deserve when creating something, and I just want to experience it and potentially be surprised at the final work. Having said that, I really like the story, but I have very mixed opinions about it, more than I had with Miles Morales for example, which is saying something as this is a main game. First, the positives. Yuri Lowenthal, Jesus Christ, that man was acting his ass off like his rent was due 600 days.
Let's go, man, before he gets too far.
No. He's mine.
You sure? He's got big teeth.
So do I.
Given how this story involves Venom and how a symbiote emotionally manipulates their host, at no moment did any of the writing felt awkward or badly placed, because Yuri's ability to click with an emotion when necessary is stellar acting, and he rightfully deserves his flowers for such a great performance.
calling the
I
hospital.
said I'd find him. I've got this under control.
All Miles talks about is how to be a better Spider-Man. Not school, not his friends. How to help you. Go help him.
Second of all, Harry's and Peter's relationship. The way the writers approach both of these characters is really heartwarming and almost like an emotional summer love roller coaster story. Their relationship unfolds similarly to how Peter always had a lot of respect for Otto, and how the catalyst that broke the camel's back reveals just how ugly and resentful Otto really was, and how Peter processed and in a sense grieved over the loss of a father figure that he really cherished. Here it plays out similarly in terms of structure, but with Venom's presence, the story delves into themes of addiction as we see the symbiote leave Harry's body and merge with Peter, and now over the course of the game he starts becoming more egotistical, to the point it starts to fuck with him, like really bad, to the point of sucking his life out.
Why don't you pop some more pills and say what you're really feeling?
Hey, don't.
In turn making the catalyst this time around be their broken relationship, and how Henry's anger allows the symbiote to evolve into Venom itself. And instead of this version sharing a symbiotic relationship with its host like with Eddie, this Venom has opposite goals, and he uses that anger as his fuel to set his plan in motion. The third one is Venom himself, and man did they really knock that out of the park with him. I've seen many criticisms of how Venom himself feels very one note with his motivations or how little of a screen time he receives, and I definitely understand those, but at the same time I disagree because I really like how his presence was mostly reserved for when you knew he would have an impact, whether it was killing Kraven and starting Operation Heal the World immediately, when he taunts Peter and Miles to join him and even go as far as to emotionally manipulate them and everyone around him to his benefit, when he turns MJ into Scream, which inadvertently brought us one of the very best therapy sessions in the form of a boss fight.
Don't feel special anymore?
What? No! You're stronger than me in so many ways! You've been single-handedly holding our lives together! I'm sorry, MJ! I took you for granted!
MJ is gone!
No! You aren't! I'm sorry I caused you so much pain! The house! My job! Our life together! I promised you I'd be better, but I wasn't! I should have listened! I should have been there! We're a team! Me and you! I never want your life to be worse, to make mine better! Your dreams are just as important as mine! You're just as important!
Or in the final encounter where he opens wings, which once again it is raw as fuck. His screen time feels very purposeful, and every time you see him on screen is, as Joker says, not about the money, it's about sending a message, and it was smart of Insomniac for playing that game. Fourth and final one is Kraven, and while I don't have much to talk about him to be honest, I love how he is a catalyst in a story for every single character, always pushing everybody to a breaking point, like capturing Miles and every single villain imaginable, poisoning Dr. Connors, forcing him to turn into the Lizard, and taunting Peter inside his black suit to really go at him without pulling punches. He's like a professional instigator with nothing to lose, and he executed every decision as chaotically as possible so he could make his last hunt a reality, just constantly on a ride of no matter the cost and sacrifices that come along the way. Now it's time for the negative/mixed opinions, and while I don't have many, I still can't gloss over how it really impacts the story. Firstly, Miles. I really love Miles. He's been quickly becoming one of my favorite Spider people thanks to the Spider-Verse and the follow-up standalone game he got for himself, and if you've been here on my channel since day one, my first ever video here was talking about Miles Morales, the game, how Insomniac approaches representation not just for him as a black teenager surrounded by people that love him and cherish him, but also his culture of him being Puerto Rican and how that influences his moral compass. The first thing I didn't like about the story is his presence in it. For the first act, I was genuinely upset at how he got drafted in the first act while Peter got an exclusive focus. And I get that's just the nature of having Harry and Venom present, but I don't really buy into that excuse when Alan Wake 2, a game with two different protagonists, manages to uphold both characters to such positions where none suffers from lack of attention or placing importance on one or the other. And Alan may well be the titular character, but Saga is never overshadowed by his presence and vice versa, which is a feat. Here, as the game progresses, it was as if they later on remember, wait, Miles is present in this story? What the hell do we do with him? So they just have him awkwardly intersect in the second act until he becomes more involved in the third act, and don't get me wrong, he has some really nice moments in the story, and his entire arc of overcoming his hate for Martin Lee really shows there are passionate writers for Miles who want to see him grow and become his own person, but an absence of urgency on his part within the story was keenly felt. There's also Miles himself, mostly to what pertains to him as a character and how he is written by Insomniac. I finally get the people who compare Insomniac Miles with Spider-Verse Miles. The more I got to meet this version of Miles, the more it dawned on me that Insomniac plays too safe with his representation compared to the Spider-Verse films or even the comics. Not talking about that weird and racist Thor thing they did with him, by the way, not that far. It's like in the games he feels gentrified, like from the way he talks naturally, the way he behaves, whereas film Miles feels more convincing and believable, like you can feel his conviction in his voice and actions, and I can guarantee you'd never hear the "nah, I'ma do my own thing" line coming from Insomniac Miles, because I don't think his writers have the confidence or the skill to really push the character into uncharted territory, and it's disappointing. Naji, he's a great actor, but man, whatever the voice directors are doing to him make him sound like a kid.
Let's go, man, before he gets too far.
No. He's mine.
You sure? He's got big teeth.
When you're playing Miles Morales, you're doing a lot of physicality. So whether it's on the mocap stage, I'm giving my all, or whether it's in the booth, I'm actually swinging, I'm actually punching, and I'm actually doing all the motions that are required into Miles.
It's a stark difference, and I'd love if Insomniac allow him to sound like a young adult and not like Michael Jackson. No offense to Mike, by the way. There's also the hair thing, and while I'm not bothered by it, I'm just worried devs will use that hairstyle as a crutch, given how we black gamers complain about the many bald afros and locks we would get, and how this side lock hairstyle feels like the cooler version they can get away again without having to push or innovate in that field. There's also the general pacing. During the in-between moments of the first game, the game would give you some breathing room to go complete some side activities until you got a call to progress the story forward. And it is a smart way to incentivize you to do other stuff. But Spider-Man 2 is the opposite. Not even a full minute goes by where you get a phone call to progress the story, and you may call me crazy for what on paper sounds as an improvement. My problem with it is how much it instinctively influences how you do the side content. There would be moments where I'm nearby a side story or side quest, and instantly I felt like I had to shift my priorities to focus on the main thing instead of the game giving me the breathing room to go at my pace like the first one did. Not to also mention as well how the third act feels really rushed and how some plot threads do not see any conclusion whatsoever. To this day, we still don't know whether Miles finished that college letter or not, and part of me expected if we finished the Brooklyn Visions Academy side story, then maybe that would have been an epilogue type scenario, but I guess I had my hopes high. And it's not just the story, the game in general just feels lacking in features. Not to the degree of it being broken or anything, but when you compare to what we've had in the past, it's puzzling not to see them present. As of the writing of this review, December 2023, we still don't have a New Game Plus mode. There are no options to change the time of day or weather. The social media feed, which had really cool world building in the previous games, is nowhere to be seen. Replaying bases, which gave more replayability once you finish the game, is gone now. How lifeless the world can really feel once you 100% complete it. I feel like not a lot of thought was put into the post game, and I would mostly blame it on rushing the game by having the most essential and basic features and have it ready for the holiday season, and further down in the future release said features as free updates. The customs also felt really lacking, and that's more of a subjective thing as everyone has different tastes. But with the first game, I have no problems in saying that the selection was nearly flawless. With Miles Morales, which they had to make original ones given how new Miles still is as a character, mind you, they still had really great outfits, and now with this one, for me personally, I'm just not into the suits this time around, which is a bummer. As we come to the finish line of this review, I guess my overall feelings are not one of disappointment, but of confusion, I guess. I'm still looking for the right word, to be honest. Part of it is that Insomniac really didn't overpromise anything, and in the end we got a game that focused on what they really wanted to focus on, quality over quantity. And the fact that the game can be platinum in 25 hours goes to show the focus to cut bloat and maintain quality was there from the beginning. And as someone who just recently entered into a phase in his life where I just don't have all the time in the world as I used to have as a kid, I really started cherishing shorter experiences more, while still finding the time to play the occasional 50+ hour game like Dying Light 2 or Like a Dragon Nation. But at the same time, I feel like Insomniac's pursuit in quality made them inadvertently shoot themselves in the foot, because the game in general is currently lacking features we've grown used to, and the end game portion is just empty with no side content to supplement it. I guess my brain is currently wired into the Yakuza mindset because, given Insomniac's approach to an iterative sequel, the Yakuza games have reached this standard where it naturally sets expectations as you hope other games can match it. Lies of P, for example, a game I haven't played it by the way, I've heard manages to not only be a good Souls game and one that matches From Software's game design really closely, but it goes beyond and expands on some ideas that benefit the goals the team set out for that game. And I was expecting Spider-Man 2 to think about that to a degree, but I guess we're not there yet. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, share with your friends and activate the bell so you can get notification of my latest video, and thank you for watching.